Hello. Welcome to eTeachers 365, where education and culture meet. My name is Elaine Johnson, wife, mother, educator, master storyteller. So first off, I want to thank everyone who watched the previous video about the do's and don'ts of teaching for Black History Month. Thank you so much for all of the feedback and the comments. And so I do try to look at the comments, and many people wondered, how do I teach about the African continent, or what projects I do in my classroom. So this video will be about that. I also want to say that I'm a third grade teacher. I've been teaching third grade for 20 years. I love third grade. And so I teach English, math, science, social studies, language arts, all of those different things. But the focus for this particular channel is around literacy, culture, social studies, and things that I do in my classroom with my third graders, but also things that I do at home with my own children. So first, as always, when I talk about subjects that might be, when I talk about different subjects, but around social studies, especially if I talk about race or culture, I always want to begin with what I think is more important than anything, and that is we are 99.9% alike. We are 99.9% alike. That's amazing. And so I talk about it in my class. We are 99.9% alike. So the things that make the difference between the whiteness of our nose or the curliness of our hair is 0.1%. So whatever we think about with the world and the country and everything that's going on, the scientists and geneticists have already discovered we are 99.9% alike. And that's pretty cool. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is that what I introduced to my class is that the oldest bones were found in Africa. The oldest bones were found on the African continent. Now, there have been more bones found recently in different areas, but the oldest bones were in Ethiopia, discovered by anthropologists years ago. There are bones in South Africa. And so the point of all this is to just make it known and clear that we all come from Africa. We all started on the African continent, and that's pretty cool. And we look around the classroom, we look at each other, and we just say, that's pretty amazing. And there might be some doubt, but history and science have both agreed that we all started in Africa, and then over the centuries, we've obviously changed and traveled. So I think that's important to mention. I always mention it in my classroom as well. The third thing is that before I start a unit of study, I always ask them, what do they already know, right? So the question is, what do you already know about Africa? Not just wait. And mainly, most of the things that I hear is that the 5 largest animals are on the African continent. Yes, that is true. The 5 largest animals are on the African continent. The pyramids are in Egypt. Yes, the pyramids are in Egypt. And sometimes people say they're poor, or they live, in not so nice houses, which is also true, but not for the entire continent and not for every African person. So one of the things that I emphasize, or that I talk to my students about, is that Africa is the second largest continent. It has the 5 large animals, but it also is the second largest continent. The United States of America, China, India, Argentina, New Zealand can all fit inside of Africa. It is 11,700,000 square miles. It's large. It has over 52 countries in Africa. So let's make sure that as we teach new subjects and we teach about new things, that we really give a good conceptual knowledge of what the continent is. I remember when I was younger, my parents used to point out to me, when you would see a world map, they tried to make Africa look a lot smaller than it actually is. Africa is the second largest continent, and it's way more than just the 5 large animals. And so that's important for children and also adults to know. So the fourth thing I want to talk about is the fact that there are so many natural resources that come from Africa. And the top 3, and of course this is something you can just ask your students, what do you think are some of the natural resources that come from Africa? Gold, oil, diamonds. The continent was always rich with these things. But people started coming over to the continent and realized there was so much here. They wanted the gold, the oil, the diamonds, and eventually the people. And so human labor became an emphasis on the African continent, which started the transatlantic slave trade. And so I think that I don't go too much into slavery with my students, but I let them know that the reason Europeans came to the continent was because of the gold, because of the oil, and because of the diamonds, and eventually the human labor. And so many countries in Africa were occupied and taken over by European countries. And so once they decided that they wanted human labor, one of the things that I tell my child and I will tell my students is that they took the strongest Africans from the ages of 15 to 25. From 15 to 25, they took from the continent, 15 to 25, the ages of 15 and 25, hundreds of Africans over 200 years, okay? And so the continent, today, is still wreaking havoc from that encounter. So it's important for people when they talk about the literacy rate or they talk about the way certain cultures live, that they know that for centuries that it was robbed, that Europeans came over and they took the natural oil, diamonds, and gold, and then eventually the people. And so it's important, it's not comfortable conversation, but they're the facts. And so depends on how you present information, that the students can hear it. They're ready and willing to learn. They want to hear the truth from us as educators. And so I just lay out the facts for them. One of the other things, one of my actual favorite stories to tell my students is all about a place in Africa, Mali. And in Mali, there is the University of Timbuktu. And so the University of Timbuktu is a place of learning. It's a university. And so when Europeans started coming to the continent, the people in Timbuktu said, we need to hide our treasures. We need to hide our treasures. And so I asked my class, well, what do you think they wanted to hide? What is it that you think were their treasures? And of course, it's gold, oil, diamonds, special gems, books. They wanted to bury their books under the University of Timbuktu. In recent years, they have discovered tens and thousands of manuscripts. These manuscripts are filled with their education, science, social studies, math, philosophy, religion. They literally wrote down all of their history and buried it. Because what they knew, and this is what I was always told as a little girl, is what they knew is that the reason they could justify enslaving African people was by saying we didn't have a language, right? We only communicated through the drums. We didn't have a language. We didn't know how to talk to one another. We only communicated through storytelling, which is all still very important communication. But again, it was a way to justify using people for labor, for free, for hundreds of years. And so the ancestors and the elders of Mali said, we have to bury this treasure. The treasure was the truth that African people have always been knowledgeable, that African people have always been mathematicians and scientists and scholars. And so the justification of slavery, of enslaving Africans, was totally opposite to what was really happening on the continent. And so for me as a teacher, it's always really important to let my students know that the African continent is filled with stories of greatness. It is filled with stories of scientists and scholars and mathematicians and doctors. And so we have to change the narrative of what people think the African continent is all about. And so I think that when I start my projects and my lessons, which I start usually in November, that it's important before we even start Black History Month that we start learning about the African continent, because I want to make sure that as they read about what has happened with Jim Crow and what has happened with civil rights and all of these things, I want them to really get a larger timeline of the world. I want them to get a better and a fuller picture of who we are and what we can be, because them hearing about the African legacy of Mali and about, other places on the continent that are amazing, when they start to read that one section, if they have to read about something about enslaved Africans, and it's all in a perspective and a timeline. And so one of the other things that I like to share that I thought was so important when I learned this, and it is about the apology. And the apology came from African chiefs in Ghana and Benin and the Ivory Coast. Many African chiefs traveled to America to apologize for slavery. I think what some people don't know is that, yes, some African chiefs did sell African people into slavery, but they had no idea what it was going to be like. Chattel slavery in the United States of America was totally different from how slavery existed on the African continent. And for people to, and I've heard this over the years, people just, when I'm saying, well, Africans also sold slaves. So African people sold their slaves. They were warring with people and they sold slaves. Yes, they did. And they did not know. And so there have been many ceremonies. There was a ceremony about 20 years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, where African chiefs from different countries came to America and apologized. They said we didn't know. And again, for me hearing that, it touched me, because there's still this hurt within the African American community, and there's hurt between our brothers and sisters on the continent about what happened and what transpired. And so what didn't make really big national news, and it wasn't like a big thing for some people, but I was told this the same way that I was told we were called prisoners of war, the same way I've learned about Yaya Santua, and the same way I've learned about University of Timbuktu, and the same way I've learned about the Great Zimbabwe. I was also told how Africans apologize. See, because my family believed that I should be told the truth, And so when I do this project in my classroom, my third graders, I start with telling them the truth. And then they all get a continent. They all get a country to choose. And then they are amazed at what they find. They're amazed. Now, make sure not everyone gets Egypt, and not everyone can learn about Madagascar, because when the movie came out a couple of years ago, everyone wanted Madagascar. But I use nonfiction books in my classroom, and again, it has hard information in here, and I read it with them sometimes, but sometimes I let them explore. I make sure that I have real resources that can help guide what they are learning about. I have stories for most of the countries: South Africa, Kenya. I choose about 15 or 20. We don't do all 52, but some Algeria, Liberia, Nigeria. They learn so much, and I just use the resources, and I tell them the truth. I tell them the stories about what has taken place on the African continent, and I tell them that not everything that happens in the world is happy. Not everything that transpires makes us feel good. Not everything, and we don't know why certain things happen, but that doesn't mean that we stay away from telling them the truth. I have these beautiful cards where it talks about the Yoruba people in Nigeria. And this one talks about Nzinga and African kingdoms. And it just talks about the kingdom of Kush, okay? And so and I haven't shared these yet because I just purchased these summer, but I'll make sure I put a link for you to also purchase these beautiful cards that just show some of the ancient African kings and queens. I also love to introduce story time. I think, a lot of times people only do folk tales. People only share, share stories. It's an African tale. These are beautiful stories, and I absolutely love to share stories with them. This is one of my favorites, Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters, an African tale. What I love about this story is that it takes place in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a place that really existed. That was a beautiful place of trade that was eventually, wasn't used anymore for that. But when I was a little girl and I saw these African princesses, but for me as an adult, well, probably like in my early 20s, for me to know that this place really existed is amazing. It's amazing. And so I think that, we need to make sure, and this book here has gorgeous, gorgeous pictures of children in Ghana, gorgeous pictures of children in Nigeria. But also what is beautiful about this, it has beautiful pictures of children in Atlanta, Georgia, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Like this, to show the connection and the beauty of African Americans in Africa is amazing. It's a wonderful thing to do. And so here's the thing. This is the way I was raised. I was raised to believe these things about Africa. I was raised to read books and watch documentaries and to really know my history and to know some of the hard truths about, things that have happened in Africa and things that have happened in America. And so what it has done for me is raised me to be a confident person, a confident teacher, a confident woman. And so when I teach these projects, and they've been happening in my classroom for the last 10 years minimum, it doesn't take away from anyone else's culture to learn about this. It doesn't take away from what someone might believe in their own selves when they hear about this. Because my classroom, I teach in a suburban school district, and there are not very many African American students in my classroom. I still do the project every single year. They love it. Guess what? The kids learn, the parents learn, and the teachers learn. And when they have an opportunity to share these projects and teach these things, then they also learn. And so every year there is an auditorium. The auditorium is filled with children. They bring in artifacts, they bring in material, they bring in books, they share music. And it is an amazing experience. They love it. The parents love it. It can be chaotic at times. It's not, they're not sitting in rows and desks and just to meet somebody on the stage and there's a presentation. No, it's interactive. People are walking around. There's music. It's a beautiful experience. And again, I've done this for at least the last 10 years and I haven't had any complaints. I haven't had parents upset that I am teaching about countries in Africa. If anything, the feedback has been positive because one, their children are getting a chance to present. Two, they are learning about something that they never learned about in school. So don't be afraid to teach your students something new and something different. I'm going to add resources in the bottom for you to use. But I just want to remind you the five things that I wanted to focus on in this video. We're 99.9% alike. That is so important. Number two, the oldest bones were found in Africa. That's where we come from. That's wonderful news. That's amazing to know that, right? Number three, Africa is more than the 5 largest animals. It is the second largest continent. Number four, the natural resources that came from Africa: gold, oil, diamonds, and eventually human labor. And then the last thing is the University of Timbuktu. We have to tell the children our stories. We have to tell children the stories of more than just the Egyptian pyramids, okay? And then also, I think for adults and, any African Americans who are listening to this story, I want you to know that they apologize. That they came over here, different chiefs in African countries apologized because they didn't know. They didn't know. So I will continue to create more videos. I will continue to share more resources. eTeaches 365, where education and culture meet. Please like, subscribe, comment, add comments to let me know what you would like to hear about more, or if you would like certain books or resources. I will put links in the comment and add more resources on my Teachers Pay Teachers. Again, eTeaches 365. Thank you.